Hello, today is the 25th of June. It's a Tuesday and it's not the day you usually see give the people what they want from across the world. And we are here with you today because it's a special episode, an episode we're very, very, very happy to bring to you, Zoe and I, because it's about Julian Assange. Finally, after all these years being free, a case, an issue that People's Dispatch, that Zoe and I and many of our colleagues, especially shout out to you, Anish, have consistently followed for many, many years, from various parts of the world. And it's not just us, I think journalists, people's movements, people of good conscience, people who believe in solidarity, people who fight for a better world across the world have been following this case, have been, been deeply invested in this case, have been rooting for Julian Assange, have been arguing for Julian Assange throughout the world. And I think it's a very happy moment for everyone today, as yesterday technically, as Assange finally walked free from Belmarsh Prison. He was inside that prison for close to, I think, 2,000 days, if I'm not mistaken. 1,901 is, I think, the number. And this was, of course, preceded by many, many years of almost being a prisoner inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London. We're going to be talking about all of that. We're going to be talking about the details of the case, his work, his life, the work of Wikileaks, the almost for lack of better word, cartoonishly evil manner in which the United States and the United Kingdom dealt with his case. But the fact is, it's not cartoonish because it had real life implications on Assange, his health, both physical and mental, getting massively affected. The impact of the work on WikiLeaks, on whistleblowers across the world, which is why this case was so pivotal to the future of free media itself, to the future of whistleblowing, to this question of, in the 21st century, how do we understand whistleblowing, how do we understand the freedom of the press? So many issues that came to the fore in this case. But yes, to again reiterate, Julian Assange is free, and it's amid all the attacks on the media across the world, amid all the persecution, amid the targeting of people who speak truth to power, it's one good day. And today we are definitely celebrating it. I mean, journalists are supposed to maintain objectivity. And, in fact, if you look at a lot of the headlines across the world, especially in what is the corporate media, there's still this tendency to sort of take, is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? Oh, he's a controversial figure. Those are the kind of terms that are used. But at People's Dispatch and many other independent portals across the world, that question has never really been in doubt. We've been very clear about this question. To get to some of the news points first, I think it's very important. Let's quickly go through the case. As we know, Assange was Assange was in the United Kingdom. He was in Belmarsh Prison, like I mentioned. There was a case going on regarding his extradition. The case has been going on for quite some time. It happened at multiple levels. We'll get to that. There was a hearing that is going to come next month. And there had been some rumors, there had been some discussion that the United States was not really 100% at this point committed to extraditing Assange for a variety of reasons. A key point, of course, being the fact that it was also embarrassing for the Joe Biden administration to have Assange come and it be a reminder of the fact that here was somebody who exposed war crimes and crimes against humanity, about Iraq, about Afghanistan, for which Biden was all gung-ho about. The question also, of course, the fact that Biden may be also seeking to get some brownie points. But there had been some talk of a potential deal for quite some time. And finally, on 24th in the Western world, 25th in the East, we got to hear, early morning we got to hear, in fact, I woke up to that news, we got to hear of the fact that Assange finally did board a plane from the United Kingdom. Now, the deal basically involves him, it's a plea bargain, which means of the various charges, he accepts one charge, he accepts that he's guilty in one charge, and the jail term for that is approximately the time he has already served in Belmarsh Prison. And of course, this will be certified on the 26th of June, I believe it will be formalized, when Assange will appear in a court in a US territory. There's a lot of legality around that. It's a very good question as to why, you must, I think, our viewers must go to, I think, what is called the North Marinara Islands read up on it, the question of why United States has sovereignty, or a U.S. judge has a seat in the North Marinara Islands, which is much is to the Far East. That's a big question, but nonetheless, he will appear in a court there where this deal will be formalized, and after that, he is free to go to Australia, his native country, and he is finally free. He's meeting his wife. He'll be able to meet his children, whom he has never seen outside of jail. It will be a big moment for not only for him but also for those children. And after this, there's finally the possibility that Assange will be able to speak to the rest of the world as a free man. There's been a lot of, deeply heart-rending, deeply touching chronicles of people who have visited Assange in jail, who have described both the torture he has undergone, undergone, as well as his irrepressible spirit. And I think we'll get to hear more of that in the coming days as well. But for right now, the fact is that he has accepted one of those counts. But the bulk of the case that the U.S. Prosecution, that the U.S. prosecutors were trying to pin on Assange, using the Espionage Act, a legacy of decades ago, which first time being used against a publisher. The bulk of those charges are not at all mentioned as part of that deal. And even this, according to reports, we got some great reports from Kevin Gostola, for instance, detailing this, and others as well. And even this plea bargain will not, does not really have much legal precedent. So the bulk of the charges that have been laid at Julian Assange's door, that the United States prosecutors for years argued, the way they argued that he was a hacker, he was a criminal, he was a spy, he had put people's lives in danger. All of those charges, they're not, they're not part of this deal at all. Assange hasn't accepted any of them, and it's not part of that plea deal. And they're basically, this is a failure for the entire U.S. State establishment, which for years, during the Trump administration, during the Biden administration, and even before, consistently tried to pin on Julian Assange to send a message to journalists across the world. So all that together, none of those charges finally sticking, and it's definitely a very, very good day for journalists across the world. Now, I think it's very important to sort of point out that Assange was not alone in the struggle. People, like I said at the beginning, people across the world participating in this struggle, not only journalists, people's movements, and that, it from ordinary people on the street to world leaders, there was an avalanche over time, and the campaign really built up that support. Zoe, take us through. You've seen firsthand some of these campaigns, the activists involved. You talked to them, you interviewed them. Take us through that world of people who were fighting for Julian Assange.
Yeah, it's so important to underscore this because, as it's reported in mainstream media, we see, the headline is really just Assange achieved a plea bargain with the U.S. Department of Justice. But that was really only possible because, as you said, this tremendous and huge campaign for his release. Important to point out that there were, of course, noticeable silences, like, for example, all of the mainstream media outlets that actually published the same documents that WikiLeaks published. For example, the collateral murder video was published by several mainstream media outlets. They remained silent the entire time that Assange was in prison. I think with the exception of The Guardian, many other news outlets did not really see this as an attack against one, as an attack against all. But that aside, first, of course, we have the really, really important work of sort of the free press organizations, the organizations dedicated to defending free media. So, for example, the Courage Foundation, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders. I mean, it's a very, very long list. National Union of Journalists. I think probably a lot of people, if you've seen any of the footage or photos from any of Assange's court proceedings, you'll never just see a photo of the High Court in London. You're going to see a picture of the High Court with a group of a lot of committed activists rallying outside with huge banners, placards saying "Free Assange, journalism is not a crime." renowned figures participated in some of these protests throughout the years of legal proceedings in the last 5 years. Vivienne Westwood, for example, a fashion designer, I think she famously created some sort of bird cage contraption. We, of course, had Jeremy Corbyn, who participated in these actions. So many different figures joining this. We know, for example, Julian for those 5 years was held at Belmarsh Prison, and there were kind of activist carolers who would go outside the prison around Christmas time and sing songs to, in a way, accompany Julian and all the other incarcerated people at Belmarsh. Once again, raise this demand for the awareness within a lot of the movement for, of course, since, even before 2019, but essentially when Julian Assange was arrested and dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy, the imminent thing that he was being held in Belmarsh Prison for was essentially awaiting these extradition proceedings, as the US, again, filed the indictment in May 2019. And for that 5-year period, it was how can people across the world put pressure not only on the US government to drop these charges, but also for the UK to actually comply with the different elements of its extradition treaty with the United States. Important to point out, I know we're going to go into some of the details of the case later, but the UK does not actually have, in the extradition treaty that it has with the United States, you can actually not do politically motivated extradition. So this was a huge point of pressure. So again, people within the UK, a huge campaign there. For a while, it was a campaign, Don't Extradite Assange, led by a lot of different rights activists, but of course, left groups within the UK as well joining this. But again, as you said, Prasanth, this is just as WikiLeaks work was not just about one country or another. This was a campaign that really affected all people, just as the attacks on Julian Assange is not just an attack on Assange, it's an attack on journalists everywhere. So we did see this international character of the movement. The International People's Assembly, for example, for the past several years, I think since 2019 as well, really adopted this campaign. And I think for a lot of people's movements, for a lot of left movements across the world, again, it's not just about, on one hand, defending the freedom of speech, which we saw a lot of these big campaigners and NGOs kind of take on this banner, but also really about opposing US imperialism, because we'll get into what exactly was the work that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks did. But the fact is that WikiLeaks revealed secrets of US imperialism. It revealed the fact that the US Army was killing civilians knowingly. It revealed the fact that not only were they committing these crimes, but then they were covering up these crimes. WikiLeaks, again, there's tens of thousands of cables that are published on the website. It's hard to even really get a clear sense of all of the different things that were brought to light because of WikiLeaks. But essentially, it's telling the people the information that their governments don't want to know. And it's for that crime that he was persecuted. And so organizations that were part of the International People's Assembly said, this is about someone that went directly against the empire and said, despite being the largest military power in the entire world, despite all of the machinery, despite all of the power that the US has in its arsenal, including its judiciary and its massive prison system, we are not going to let that cower us into fear. And actually, the people of the world need to know about these crimes. And so not only were the crimes of Iraq and Afghanistan and Guantanamo Bay revealed in these leaks, which are causes of the people. These were wars that the people had been on the streets in the millions to oppose. And what WikiLeaks revealed is that, in fact, yes, the people were right in opposing this. This is exactly what happened in these wars. But many other things that also motivated people to say, this is someone who actually paid a debt to humanity in their revelations, and we need to rally by his side because of what it says about US imperialism, because of what it says about its ability to crack down on the press. And so, yeah, we saw, mobilizations outside the UK embassy, mobilizations outside the US embassy. There was a human chain that was formed around the UK Parliament. So many different diverse and creative actions. And I'll just quickly go through some of the higher level proceedings that happened. We know Latin America and the Caribbean, which is a region that currently has a lot of progressive leaders in power, was one of the regions which really, really took on this campaign, and not only at the level of people's movements, but also world leaders and the elected leaders. Lula da Silva, who himself served over 500 days in prison because of his work as president of the country, and because of course, attacks from the right wing, really, really sympathized with the case of Julian Assange. And he's had spoke out on many occasions, calling Assange a hero, saying that his contributions were contributions to humanity. He called for his release several times. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who was the president of Mexico, again, very, very strong advocate. He even went as far as to say to Joe Biden's face that he was going to advocate for Assange's freedom, that this was actually an issue of bilateral relations. And I want people to understand how important that is. He brought this up at a bilateral meeting with his most important trade partner. That's not something that's small. And he famously said that if Assange gets extradited to the United States and imprisoned, that there should be a campaign to take down the Statue of Liberty because it would have no meaning there. Gustavo Petro, also a very, very prominent advocate of Julian Assange. He received Julian Assange, his brother and his father in Bogota. Similarly, Andrés Manuel received his brother and father. Claudia Sheinbaum, who is the president-elect of Mexico, actually gave them the keys of the city because Julian Assange was not present. These are very, very important acts that all of them put pressure on the United States to actually, again, as you said, have a preference towards actually reaching a deal, because the public embarrassment of imprisoning a journalist for revealing its secrets was a very, very high price to pay. The US is not in a position where it can actually suffer these sort of public embarrassments, as it's currently backing a genocidal power in Palestine. And so this was really crucial to actually putting this pressure on the United States. And I think the UK was also very not keen to have its hands dirty in this embarrassing case of persecution.
Right, Zoe, it's very important what you said. In fact, Wikileaks has also highlighted that point. In fact, I'll just read their tweet. It says that by that it means the release of Assange is a result of a global campaign that spanned grassroots organizers, press freedom campaigners, legislators, and leaders from across the political spectrum, all the way to the United Nations. This created a space for a long period of negotiations with the US Department of Justice. And I think, what you said is very integral. The fact that, across the world, people, countries which Assange, for instance, may never even have visited, but countries whose people found, like you said, the fact that WikiLeaks work somehow in some way touched their lives, whether it be Tunisia, whether it be Ghana, whether it be India for that matter, wherever. There was such an wave of support. But also, I think important to note at this point the kind of the trajectory of how the Julian Assange was persecuted over the years, and it kind of important to note that, like I said, first of all, there were those charges of sexual abuse, and Assange at that point had said that he was willing to actually go to Sweden and take part in the case. And later, of course, those charges were dropped, but he was willing to take part in that case if he got the assurance that he would not be extradited to the United States. And that really was his concern, that he would be extradited for his work, which we'll talk about later. But there was a refusal to provide that kind of an assurance. And then while he was in the United Kingdom, as he was surrounded, as he was besieged, he was forced to seek asylum in Ecuador's embassy. And he spent, I believe, nearly 7 years, if I'm not mistaken, close to 7 years in Ecuador's embassy, small building in London, where he had access to a very small amount of physical space. And during that time, later reports said that there was a consistent effort on spying on him. A Spanish newspaper reported a company which claimed to have actually spied on him, including, I believe, checking his trash, if I'm not mistaken. There was some reference to that as well. And also, I believe in 2017, the U.S. Officials, including Mike Pompeo, later talking about, plans to either kidnap or assassinate him. All of those were discussed at maybe the highest levels of the U.S. government, and that kind of that it's and in fact during the trial, many people argued that these factors alone should have been enough to throw the case entirely out, because here you have a party which was consistently spying on and conspiring against Julian Assange. But what happened was that in 2019, Assange was Ecuador. Again, I think we'll come to that a bit later, but Ecuador was lured and coerced probably simultaneously into expelling Assange from his embassy, and there was that very horrific sight of Assange being dragged out by British police personnel and taken to Belmarsh Prison. And then we had nearly 5 years of judicial proceedings, the bulk of which, technically initially Assange was jailed because he had jumped bail from many years ago, but that was a very short jail term. And after that, he was pretty much kept without charge or trial until this whole extradition process was resolved. And that extradition process continued for a long, long time. In fact, at the first level, we had Judge Vanessa Barretza, who actually, gave a verdict saying that Assange could not be extradited, and she cited, among other things, the fact that there was a suicide risk, considering the kind of atrocious conditions he would be subjected to if he were transferred to a U.S. jail. And of course, later that was overturned. Then Julian Assange appeal. A lot of that happened. But I think throughout this whole process, what Assange's advocates, what his supporters throughout the world insisted was that, first of all, the U.S. Espionage Act was being used on an act of journalism. And I think that was the most central argument being made here. What Assange and Chelsea Manning together had released information in a way which journalists have been doing for decades at this point. Journalists have sources who often reveal classified information. This information is put out, and this information was very important for people across the world. There was no question about that, right? So this method of journalism was what was being criminalized in a very, by claiming that, no, this was not journalism, this was hacking, this is not journalism, this is spying, and it's an age-old pattern of trying to persecute journalists and whistleblowers in this way. And Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning were both subjected to that kind of persecution. Chelsea Manning, in fact, also spent time in jail before being pardoned. And as in Assange's case, of course, the United States did everything possible to pretend that this was not a political case. They did everything possible to make this seem like this was somehow a case from some very bad mystery or spy thriller. And the whole attempt, both through their arguments in court and through the kind of journalism reporting that happened to the case, a lot of it actually gave out that kind of impression that this was, an attempt. This was some kind of large spy operation, as opposed to the legitimate journalism this was. And like Zoe said, newspapers across the world carried the work of WikiLeaks, including in India. Newspapers carried the work of WikiLeaks, very important work which kind of revealed. And we're talking not just, for instance, of Afghanistan. We're talking about cables, diplomatic cables, which had relevance for people across the world, and this was reported very widely. So this persecution of Assange was pretty much meant to sort of target or send a message to whistleblowers across the world that you do not, you cannot sort of cross this line, and that is really the message they were conveying at a time when, especially due to technology, there was a possibility of many more secrets being leaked than ever before. And it has continued even after Julian Assange. We know what Edward Snowden, did as well. Although he was he was not, he was an analyst. He was also on the tech side of stuff. But nonetheless, he was able to reveal very, very crucial information about the nature of spying. And over the years, we have seen others as well who have been whistleblowers, who have revealed various kinds of information, despite them not being top level or senior level officers. In fact, I think some experts have talked about how the nature of whistleblowing itself has changed. There are a lot of people who, because of their functions in maintaining databases, in maintaining technology, have access to information which earlier they would not have had. And so there was an entirely new era of whistleblowing that came into being, especially when Assange inaugurated that. and this was an attempt by the United States to sort of crush that, at its at a very nascent stage itself. But clearly, I don't think that's ever going to happen, because there'll always be people who will be whistleblowers who will want to reveal this kind of information. But a very very problematic attempt, to say the least, by U.S. prosecutors throughout this time. They kept, in fact, there are a lot of irregularities in this case. We won't go into this at this point. I really urge you to read People's Dispatch coverage of Julian Assange's case. Every time there's been a court hearing, People's Dispatch has done almost a day-by-day analysis of the arguments that were presented. It is quoted experts who poked holes at the contentions made by the U.S. prosecutors. The U.S. prosecutors, in fact, at various points, saying that they made a variety of arguments which are problematic, but among them, for instance, the fact that initially they did not give clarifications about the kind of conditions in which he would be incarcerated, and later they gave some assurances. But even what those value of those assurances is a very important question. So there were a variety of problematic aspects about that case. I would really urge you to read all that, because it is a very good example of how procedure was used, procedure and legality was used to basically put a man behind bars for so many years, although he clearly did not deserve to be. And I think it's very important to sort of keep all of that in mind. And Assange might be free, but the factors, the method through which he was imprisoned, the arguments that the United States authorities used continue to be, for lack of a better word, a danger to journalists across the world. These are warnings to journalists across the world, and I think journalists across the world need to heed, or to study the ways in which journalism was sought to be suppressed by U.S. authorities. And I think, Zoe, before we quickly wind up, you might want to take us through, I think, two aspects. One, you've been following closely the question of Ecuador itself, but also I think what, at this point, how do what does WikiLeaks mean for journalists like us, and even for people and activists across the world as well?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it was, I think the fact that when there was a more U.S. influenced right-wing neoliberal government that took over in Ecuador, and was really, I liked the formulation you used, half coerced, half pushed kind of thing, to actually reject the asylum that it had granted Julian Assange. Interestingly, and then kind of fully going on this IMF, US kind of backed route, of course, granting US access to, for example, opening up the possibility of US having access to military bases in Ecuador. Clearly there was some spurious kind of negotiations, which led to him being arrested from the embassy. But yeah, I think, just to reflect on a bit about like why was Julian Assange persecuted? We've said it many times. We've mentioned some of the things that he revealed. What's interesting also is that around the time that he was arrested, there was a bit of a more frenzy of the work that he did with regarding, for example, Hillary Clinton emails. And there was a bit of, for example, in the US, liberal popular opinion around the persecution of Julian Assange, saying that like WikiLeaks was on the side of Donald Trump somehow, which is of course a ridiculous accusation. But beyond that, during what was interesting is, and you'll be able to see this if you read the reports on the different parts of his trial and the extradition hearing, his work really did touch so many people. And I remember that there was a torture victim, someone who had been essentially kidnapped and brought to one of the US's infamous like black sites, which are these clandestine torture facilities located across the world. And I think he was later at one point brought to Guantanamo, and then they realized, oh, actually this guy is not who we were allegedly looking for. Who knows, what nondescript sort of description they had to even arrest someone and torture them for years. And this victim actually found out about some of the conversations about his case and the irregularities of his case through WikiLeaks, through some of those cables. And he actually went to the trial and testified about the importance of these revelations for not only his process of justice, but also his sort of process of healing as a victim. It's when we talk about these leaks, these cables, these logs, these things that are on the WikiLeaks website, it's important to really bring it back to what we're really talking about now, which is thousands of people who have been impacted by U.S. wars, by U.S. covert operations, by U.S. intervention in their countries, having access to what the U.S. doesn't want them to know, which is the truth. And this doesn't, the truth doesn't change the world, but it gives us and gives people the ability to actually take action and make those changes and force and demand those changes. And so, for example, the use of torture that the U.S. had been denying for many years. This was, of course, revealed in the Gitmo files, in, again, the Iraq war logs. The use of, the U.S. spying on its allies, using a diverse array of spying techniques on people that it was actually working with. This, of course, really, really important. Again, in its revelations about what was happening on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think when we're thinking about what's happening today in Palestine, what's happening in Gaza, where there have been so many, every single day, the US and Israel is pumping out more lies. We've already had such important investigative work done by different journalist bodies, by different outlets, and surely it will be of utmost importance that journalists will actually be able to do the kind of work that WikiLeaks was doing. I hope that it's Julian Assange doing this work, although hopefully he gets time off. But to actually know that we already know that all of these crimes are coordinated, are intentional. The report on the use of AI to target different homes in Gaza. But these are things that in a day-to-day basis we're being fed. The U.S. media is trying to impose on us, trying to say, no, actually, the crimes are not really being committed by the Israeli army. This isn't exactly right. If people remember, for example, I think it was in November when the Baptist hospital, when there was a horrific massacre, and there was an attempt to say that it was actually Hamas who had bombed this hospital. Sometimes we take it for granted that these things are able to be debunked. And it is because of these sort of contributions of WikiLeaks and because of Julian Assange that there is more of this being done. And we're going to continue seeing this. This kind of work is going to be crucial in giving people the information they need in revealing these sorts of crimes. So, it's such an important moment to say that putting pressure on governments to actually reverse these processes of persecution is effective, as there's still hundreds of political prisoners in some way or another being held by the United States, whether it's their persecution against people in the war on terror, the many different political prisoners that were arrested in the revolutionary period in the US in the 60s that still remain in prison, Leonard Peltier, Mumia, many people that the US would rather lock up than have the truth about what they've done be revealed. And so it's an important day to celebrate the victory of Julian Assange and also give us confidence that these sort of campaigns are crucial in our work. The US is not a monolith. It is not it does actually have its contradictions and its weaknesses. And the Julian Assange campaign was an impressive example of so many different people across the world coming together for this cause, coming together for the defense of the freedom of the press, coming together to say exposing the crimes of U.S. imperialism is not a crime. I know that, of course, when there's a plea deal, there is an admission of guilt. But we know that Julian Assange is only guilty of being a truth teller, is only guilty of being a journalist, of being a publisher. Journalism is not a crime. And I think that's why at People's Dispatch, we have covered this so extensively, because as journalists, it's our duty. It's our duty to defend this right. It's our duty to defend journalists like Julian Assange. There's hundreds of him like Julian Assange across the world that are doing this work. Of course, the journalists in Gaza, who over 100 have been killed by Israeli forces, others forced to flee, in the line of duty, trying to give the people the reality of what's happening on the ground. Hopefully there are more and more journalists like Assange, like the journalists in Gaza, who are ready to actually face, what could be life-altering consequences for this noble act of telling the truth and empowering the people. So we'll be following it. Hopefully, at the current moment, I think he's on a jet to, again, this U.S. colony in the Pacific. And the expectation is that after his court proceeding there on what would be Tuesday evening in U.S. time and there in the morning, that he'll return to Australia. And as you said, Prasanth, be united with his family after far too long. So
we're closely tracking that, and of course, keep watching. Give the people what they want as we come back on Friday as well. Bye for now.